As human beings, our nature is to question the world around us. What are we? What is our purpose? And how are we to relate to one another? By such questioning, we are able to understand our own being and how to protect certain rights that are self-evident within ourselves from any act of despotism from another. Self-government is a sacred right because each of us is equally endowed by nature with such rights to life, liberty, and the protection of property. The art of politics is nothing short of the study of human nature. We all take part in it. However, many people do not understand the significance of the study within the world of political science as we know today. This is why to study politics at Colorado Christian University is a unique endeavor in today's society. The political science department at Colorado Christian teaches their students to think for themselves about the origin of their individual rights and the best means to protect them. The department, coupled with the Centennial Institute, offers many opportunities for students to apply what they have learned in the classroom to the world around them. Students have been placed in internships at the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., the Colorado State Legislature, the First Judicial District Attorney's Office, and our very own Centennial Institute. They have been able to participate in such Centennial Institute and CCU events as the Western Conservative Summit, Issue Mondays, and the 9/11 Memoriam. Students have also been sent to D.C. for conferences put on by such prestigious organizations as the Young America's Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, and the Heritage Foundation. Every year, CCU students of any academic discipline are invited to attend a week-long course of politics in our nation's capital. Washington Week, as it is called, allows students to investigate the legislative process in their own role as responsible citizens. Educating and commissioning responsible citizens is the primary task of Colorado Christian University's Political Science Department, with an aim towards building a better American public grounded in its foundational principles. We are therefore very lucky to have such esteemed professors to help guide us on this path. Dr. Thomas Krannawitter, professor of politics at Colorado Christian University, has spent his entire career seeking to understand the classical conception of the good while doing what he believes is right in accordance to nature's law. He has imparted his own desire and hunger for the truth to many of his students, including myself. Just as his greatest teacher before him, Abraham Lincoln, Dr. Krannawitter has a spectacular devotion to freedom and dedication to the natural right principles of the Declaration of Independence that enable self-governance and have made America truly the most interesting government in the world. Dr. Krannawitter is an accomplished author, lecturer, and teacher, and I personally credit much of my own understanding of life, liberty, and the politic to his teaching and mentorship. It is therefore my great honor to introduce our very own Dr. Thomas Krannawitter.
Wow. Do you know that just 5 days ago, she had complete reconstructive knee surgery? What kind of woman comes and gives an introduction after something like that? If you doubt that we are training freedom fighters for self-government at CCU, I'd like to give you Exhibit A, Miss Brittany Corona. You're going to want to keep track of her because she's going places in the world, and you're going to want to be invested in her good work. This is a subject of deep interest to us at CCU. Self-government. If the greatest act of trust aimed out of this world is faith in the omnipotent creator of the world, then I would argue the greatest act of trust aimed in this world is self-government. Self-government, at the end of the day, means nothing less than we trust each other enough to let us live our lives freely, take care of ourselves as we see fit, rule ourselves rather than trying to rule others without their permission. This session, we're going to do something a little different. This all began with a challenge. Recently, I was at a dinner party with my friend Charlie Fody, and Charlie challenged me to write an inaugural address for the next President of the United States. He said, "Krannawitter, you think you know these things? Put it down in an inaugural address. What should the President say?" And I thank Charlie for that challenge, and I hope that what I've produced lives up to the standards he expects. So I've produced an inaugural address that I think is worthy of the highest office in the country. We've published it in the current Centennial Institute Review, and there are copies of it outside if you're interested. So now I'm going to use my imagination and step into the office of the presidency, January 20th, 2013. Fellow Americans, I stand before you honored and humbled to take the sacred oath of President of the United States. I stand before you with great hope, but also with grave concerns at the state of our union. As Americans, we live in a constitutional republic of our own design and direction. The freedom we enjoy is unmatched in the annals of history. We are fortunate, some would say blessed. But it is nowhere foreordained that America will remain free. America places its destiny in the hands of its citizens, who can make of America what they will, for better or for worse. The future of our country literally depends on the character and education, the choices of our citizens. What to do with America and how to do it are questions each new generation of Americans must wrestle with and decide for themselves. This does not mean we are abandoned to making these fateful choices blindly or arbitrarily. America was founded on distinctive moral, political, and economic principles. Principles of freedom incorporated in a political regime for the first time ever by the men and women of 1776. As Thomas Jefferson explained, quote, "Every species of government has its specific principles. Ours are perhaps more peculiar than those of any other in the universe." End quote. By learning these principles and the logic of individual, political, and economic and religious freedom that flows from them, we today can prepare ourselves to make vitally important choices in our personal as well as in our public capacities, and to make them wisely. The foundation for all our freedoms rests upon simple, self-evident truths. That all men are created equal in their natural rights to life, liberty, personal property, and the pursuit of happiness. That the only legitimate form of government derives all its authority and all its power from the consent of those who are governed by it. That the only legitimate purpose of government is to secure those equal natural rights which with all the governed have been endowed by their Creator, not to dispense unequal entitlements and favors to different groups. And finally, that the only legitimate way for government to advance its purpose is through laws that are fair, knowable, constitutional, and provide equal protection to all who live under them. These principles were given political life by our wisely designed Constitution. It may not be perfect. No human constitution ever will be perfect. But it is a work of political genius, the closest approximation to a perfect constitution of liberty the human mind has ever conceived. Even the sad story of human slavery and its influence on the drafting of the Constitution is itself a monument to liberty, trying to deal with an evil institution which they did not create, but had inherited and could not easily or quickly eradicate. The Americans of our founders made only those concessions to slavery that were utterly necessary to keep our union together. And those decisions were therefore the right thing to do at that moment in that situation. They restricted the spread and influence of slavery as much as possible, and they paved the way for its total eventual elimination. Perhaps America's greatest moral achievement, made possible by America's greatest statesman, Abraham Lincoln. This is a story of which all Americans should not be ashamed. You should be proud, as is the continuing story of our nation's endeavors to ensure equal protection and opportunity for all, a record unexcelled in all of human history. Our greatest challenge today is recovering the full authority of our Constitution of Liberty in our political life. There is good news. There are parts of the Constitution we still follow today, witnessed by the fact that we continue to hold free and open elections when the Constitution calls for free and open elections. We respect the Constitution every time an incumbent who loses an election freely and peacefully leaves public office, and a challenger who wins an election is allowed freely and peacefully to assume the responsibilities and powers delegated to him by the people for his elected term. This is a great feat in the violent human history of political controversies over the controls of government. We Americans should applaud ourselves for solving with ballots what most nations historically solved through bullets. But there's bad news as well. There are large swaths of the Constitution that are violated frequently by our government and ignored by the American people. Government routinely exercises powers and passes policies, often at enormous expense and unfunded debt, nowhere authorized by the Constitution. And in many instances, the American people have responded with apathetic disinterest and compliance. The question that should always be at the front of our minds is, if we allow government to ignore or violate parts of our Constitution, on what ground do we stand when government ignores all of it? 3/4 of a century ago, a new political vision was offered to the American people. This new view suggested that there are different kinds of rights that answer different kinds of threats. In the era of the founding, so this argument went, when political tyranny was the great threat against Americans, political rights, such as free elections and representation in government, the right to property, the right to religious liberty, the right to free speech and free press, these political kind of rights were the solution. These were the rights for which the revolutionaries of 1776 fought. But according to this new view, America in the 1930s now faced a different kind of threat. Not political tyranny, but economic tyranny. Against the alleged threats of big corporations and big businesses, Americans were now in need not of political rights, but economic rights, entitlements to things such as jobs, prices and wages set by government, a house, an education, health insurance, Social Security, and much more. This was the new definition of rights suggested by a president elected to office for an unprecedented 4 terms, a view that has largely shaped our politics ever since. The biggest obstacle for implementing this new view of rights was the United States Constitution, which nowhere authorizes government to take from some Americans so that it can distribute homes and jobs and insurance and material goods to others. Ours is not a constitution of redistribution. Thus, that same president and the many followers after him suggested that Americans become less vigilant in demanding government obedience to the Constitution, or that we interpret our Constitution as a living, evolving document that can be distorted and changed to permit rather than prohibit such expansive reaches of government power. And in their desperate conditions during the Great Depression, many Americans agreed. But today, in 2013, we have overwhelming evidence that all these powers government has exercised beyond the scope of the Constitution have not improved our lives. They've made our lives worse. The very unconstitutional policies enacted by government to solve the Great Depression actually made that depression worse, more severe, and longer than it needed to be. By extracting so much capital from the private sector at precisely the moment when America needed economic growth and the creation of capital, Washington caused the economic crisis to spiral and deepen for almost 2 decades. Even more importantly, those policies have made us today far too comfortable with unconstitutional government. Americans have become increasingly accustomed to favoring unconstitutional policies if we can expect direct and immediate benefits. And we often ignore other unconstitutional and harmful policies that don't seem to affect us so immediately. Almost absent-mindedly, we have allowed all of those bad policies to compound and worsen right to this day. Today, at last, fellow citizens, let us agree that it is time to stop. It is time to become vigilant, again in defense of our Constitution. It is time to choose whether we will repeat the same mistakes of old or move forward to a new era of constitutional freedom, limited government, and economic growth and prosperity. Recently, we've focused much of our attention on the distribution of wealth between those with much and those with little. But in the meantime, we seem to have forgotten what precedes any distribution of wealth: the creation of it. Government has no wealth. Wealth must be created. And if government follows the processes of the Constitution, it creates no wealth at all, nothing of value to be bought or sold. Imagine if all Americans stayed home and did not work. Government would have nothing. If the people do not work, there's nothing for government to tax. And no one would lend us money, because if the American people are not working, America would have no way of repaying its debt. Every penny our government might control and spend comes ultimately from the American people. Now, no one favors poverty. All of us agree it's bad. But what is poverty, and what is the solution? There's no greater question for us, especially in these times of persistently high unemployment and stagnant growth. Poverty, in short, is the absence of wealth. The solution? The creation of wealth. But how is wealth created? Not through government policies and programs. Those can only confiscate or redistribute wealth. Wealth is created by human labor, the human mind and body working together to create and invent and produce and distribute goods and services that other people find valuable enough to purchase. Things like medicine, food, new technology of all kinds. Unless we resort to stealing, the only way one person can get the goods another has produced is by producing something of equal value that he can trade. That is the principle of free enterprise, and it is what made America the wealthiest, most prosperous country in history. By allowing each person to keep what his labor produces, by protecting personal property rights strictly, we give each person a tremendous incentive to be entrepreneurial, creative, and industrious, because he knows that the more he produces, the more he keeps. This is why there was very little economic growth. There was very little wealth to be distributed under feudalism, slavery, and other unjust forms of economic servitude that plagued mankind throughout most of history. Only through the protection of individual rights, limited government, the rule of law, and the protection of property did we see a sharp, unprecedented explosion in the creation and spread of capital. The free market economy, enshrined in our Constitution, was the greatest anti-poverty program in human history. Think about this. America went from a nation of dirt-poor farmers to the most powerful, wealthiest nation in the world in only a few generations. We ignore that lesson at our own economic peril, but we can look ahead to a wealthier, healthier, happier future by finding our way back to limited government and economic freedom and the policy of protecting property that we know works. There is one significant area in which the Constitution grants to government significant, though not unlimited, power: national defense. If there's one purpose the government must do well, it is to secure the American people against all threats, foreign and domestic. If government fails this basic task, it can fulfill none other. But in our appetite for increased domestic spending, our national defense and military resources have been diminished relative to the growing dangers in a growingly dangerous world. It's simple. There's only so much money the government can raise, and the more we spend on domestic programs, the less we spend on national security. The result is a shrinking Navy, an Army that could easily be stretched beyond capacity, and a refusal to develop and deploy the ablest, most advanced technology possible to defend the United States of America. This has led many who are hostile to America to attack us or to threaten us with impunity. We have shown the world that we are willing to confiscate and redistribute the property of our own citizens. We've shown the world that we're willing to limit the civil liberties of our own citizens and to watch them with increased suspicion. But we have not shown the world an unwavering resolve to defend ourselves against external enemies. The result has been to embolden those who would challenge or harm us. Today, we cannot stop a single incoming nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile aimed at the American heartland. But we know it can be done. In numerous tests, we have hit a bullet with a bullet. If we have the political will, we can protect ourselves from even the most menacing threats to us. It's not the American way to not do something because we don't think we can. That's not American. Americans are brilliant at figuring out technical solutions to technical problems. It is time to focus the attention of American government on the first and foremost priority: developing every and all means of protecting the American people from all threats of injury. We must show the rest of the world that while we appreciate and protect our friends, we will not be intimidated by our enemies, and any attempt to harm us will result in pain and destruction. It will then be each nation's choice whether they choose to be a friend or an enemy of the United States of America. That distinction between friends and enemies ought to be the core of all American foreign policy. For too long, we have catered to, and in many instances, given material support for regimes that are openly hostile to us. At the same time, we have treated less than well some of our friends. The little nation of Israel is a beacon of light and freedom in a dark part of the world where freedom is almost unknown. Let us reaffirm our committed friendship with Israel and help her defend herself against tyrannical forces that surround her. A free and strong Israel is a powerful sign to despots that, regardless of size, freedom is stronger than slavery. Fellow citizens, let us once again become vigilant. Let us help one another study the great features of our own constitutional system of government. Let us regain a healthy skepticism about government. Let us remember that each time government acts, it bears the burden of proof that its action is both beneficial for the people, securing our natural rights, and authorized by the Constitution. For my part, as your president for the next 4 years, I stand pledged to veto any bill coming from Congress that includes anything other than the enumerated powers delegated by the people to government through their Constitution. By recovering the authority of our Constitution, by insisting on limited domestic spending and limited government, combined with a robust national defense and wise foreign policy, we have before us a future of light. This can be a new day for freedom in America. It is time to renew our dedication that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, but that it shall protect the God-given rights of the people who formed it, who own it, and who command it. With His help, we can do this. We must do this. God bless all of you, and God bless the United States of America.